our board committee sessions, and tomorrow's agenda is the official meeting when the board will vote on its action items. Board members are reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record, and if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair, and it will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. You know, I note that this is always an exciting time of year for us as we begin another school year, and while it's certainly exciting, this year we face again another potentially disastrous storm with Hurricane Dorian. So we trust that everyone will be safe, and please follow the advice of officials to prepare and evacuate as needed. Our particular thanks to our superintendents and teachers who are wrestling with this issue now, and we trust your judgment in protecting our students. At this time, traditional calendar and year-round schools have welcomed our students back for another year to learn many new and wonderful concepts, and we look forward to the learning opportunities that we provided to the approximate 1.5 million students we serve each day. Also, this time of year allows us to reflect on performance and review the accountability data for the prior year. As such, later this morning, the 2018 accountability results will be revealed after an intensive review and an opportunity for correction by districts and schools. Board members, you've seen the agenda for over a week and have had the opportunity to review it. I ask if there are any requests for changes, and if not, I request a motion for approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
Mr. Chair, I move approval of the agenda.
Motion by Ms. White. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Chastain. Dr. Townsend Smith, will you call the roll to capture the vote?
Yes, sir. Mr. Buxton?
Yes.
Ms. Chemnitz?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Chastain?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Thank you. The motion carries. We have an agenda. We'll now proceed to our committee meetings, and we'll begin with the Student Learning and Achievement Committee, and I call on Mr. J.B. Buxton, Chair of the Student Learning and Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would note that joining me in this endeavor is our Vice Chair, Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine is in hurricane preparation as part of UNC Pembroke's preparation, so wishing her community well. And Mr. Chairman, building off your comments, just a moment of personal privilege. It's the first time in 18 years I haven't had a kid in the public schools in North Carolina. They're all off to college. And I'm thankful at this time for the Bill McNeil, the superintendent I started with, and Kathy Moore, the superintendent I ended with, principals like Dr. Chavis, Dr. Dula, Liz Colbert, Mr. Schwenker, and teachers like the one that the children all refer to as Queen in second grade, Teacher Queen, Coach Womble, Mr. Wilson, Miss Wooten, people who were as much a part of my children's development as I feel like my wife and I were. And I'm always reminded that at this board table, we set the table for them. And our work to build their capacity, provide them the tools and resources, and at times expectations that they need to serve our kids is our key role. Those people were always equal to the task for my kids, and so it's, I think, a privilege to try to be equal to the task for them. But after 18 years, it's a little strange to not be the parent of the public schools, and thank you for that. We have a packed agenda, board members, in SLA today. We are going to start with SLA 1 and go into SLA 2, which is our 2018-19 Accountability and School Performance Grades Report. Dr. Tammy Howard will come up and work through our data. Dr. Howard.
Thank you and good morning.
Morning.
So as we begin this report this morning, we continue to look first and foremost at the test data. It is the test data on our end of grade and our end of course assessments that drive the school performance grades, the growth analysis, the long-term goals, and the participation. At the end of the presentation, we'll be looking at the state designations for low performing that will be presented by Dr. Beverly Emery, and a report from Dr. James Ellerby on the Innovative School District and the qualifying list for those. So to begin with the test data, of course, we're referring to the end of grade mathematics, reading, and science, and the end of course biology, English 2, NC Math 1, and NC Math 3. As a reminder, levels 3 and above are grade level proficiency, and that is what is used for school performance grades. Percentage of students at levels 4 and above are used for long-term goals and reported in all federal accountability. We did have the implementation of new mathematics assessments this year, of which I'm sure you recall from last month's events. And so as we look through this data, we have to remember that any conclusions that we draw in looking at mathematics, particularly across years, is limited due to those new assessments. We do provide, as we walk through this information, the previous year's data for mathematics because that question is always asked, but yet we do want to caution ourselves for drawing any significant conclusions. So in summary, this is the 2018-19 end of grade reading performance for each grade level presented, both grade level proficient and career and college ready. And let me also note that all of this information and some additional information is in an attachment, which is the actual report, which we in past have shared with the board, but we thought this year we would walk through with a PowerPoint instead. So as you look through, you'll also see these results for mathematics, and then also for grade 8 mathematics. So we'd like to stress that we're reporting out grade 8 mathematics a little bit differently than we have in the past, and that is because effective with last school year, grade 8 mathematics is a subset of those students in grade 8. It is not all of the students in grade 8. A subset of those students take the NC Math 1 end of course assessment, and that is the only assessment they take. And that is due to action through the Every Student Succeeds Act. They gave us the flexibility to end double testing at grade 8, which is much appreciated across the state. But when you look at these numbers, we have to remember the students that we are talking about. So the grade 8 math EOG, if you break it out by itself, and you'll see here that the grade level proficiency is 35.6, the college and career readiness proficiency is 19.5, and that is markedly different than what we would see if we went back to the slide on all the other grade levels 3 through 7. But that is because the grade 8 EOG is only those students that are not taking the NC Math 1. Then if we look at the grade 8 NC Math 1, you actually see much higher scores than you're going to see once we get to the end of course information. And again, this is a subset. These are our higher performing math students who qualify to take NC Math 1 prior to going to high school. And you can see the grade level standard there is at 92.7. And then when we combine those two together, that's where we get all of our grade 8 students, those taking NC Math 1 and the grade 8 math. And then you can see it's more consistent with what we're typically seeing in the other grade levels. So then we also next turn our attention to looking across years. We begin with reading, and this is levels 3 and above. And you can see here that if you look at both slides, this is this slide and the next slide, some grade levels go up, some grade levels go down. This is what we've seen in North Carolina for quite a few years now. It is important to note, and we're not sure why, but grade 3 went up both for grade level proficiency and college and career, and grade 8 went up both for grade level proficiency in college and career. The other grade levels is a mix of up and down. So nevertheless, we do like the way that is going overall and that we are seeing some of those increases. And then the next few slides look at mathematics, and again, we look at levels 3 and above, and looking at those previous years. And there again, we see the up and down, and we have to have the caution, of course, with the respect to standard setting, and that is why we put in bold the most recent results, which is the 2018-19 school year. Now, one of the things that we will notice, we look at the level 3 and above, these numbers are very close in what we're seeing historically in mathematics. Even though we're saying don't draw conclusions, we can see that really at the end of the day, for the most part, they're very consistent with what we have seen. When we look at level 4 and above, that's where we note some marked differences, and that is partly due to the standard setting and going through that new standard setting process. Some of those previous level 4 students probably went down into the level 3 range. So the level 3 and above historically is pretty consistent with what we've seen, but when we look at level 4 and above, we start seeing a few differences there. So grades 5 and 8 science, this is the real success story of the day. Grades 5 and 8 science, historically, we've seen a little bit up and down, but more so than reading and math, they have showed increases over time. And this year, they're showing increases for both level 3 and above and level 4 and above at both grades 5 and 8. So we've had some internal conversations. We're not really sure why, but when you see this kind of success that's consistent, it does make you want to say, why are we seeing this increase in science? What is happening in science that is yielding this type of success across the board? So we don't necessarily have an answer this morning, but that is something that perhaps we can continue to think about and discuss. And our end of course assessments, they all went up this year, which is good, with the exception of English 2, that just went slightly down by 1/10 of a point. But we always acknowledge that with statewide data, at a school it's different, but with statewide data with this number of scores, really any change is pretty significant. And again, we want to focus a little bit on end of course mathematics. Here, this is reporting all NC Math 1, regardless of when it was taken. So you can see for all students who took NC Math 1, the percentages there meeting level 3 and above and level 4 and above. And then NC Math 3, which, is markedly different in looking at those results in NC Math 1. This is the first year for an end of course assessment for NC Math 3. So we would expect, as time goes on, to see this course performance improve over time. And then we have this chart that has a lot of color on it, but of course this is really getting down to what we're all most interested in, is not just looking at the aggregate, which is what we've done so far, but to also disaggregate this data and look at all of the different subgroups that we have represented in our state and see their performance. Now, it's hard to take a great deal away from this, but we would like to share that on our website under the accountability page, all of this information is available by district and by school. So the practitioners that use this data can get down to what is impacted in their world at their school level or their district level and see how their subgroups of students are performing. So we do have some other reportable measures that are part of the accountability report. First, we have the ACT, which is administered to all students in membership at grade 11, and this is the result of that. And you can see that went down to 55.8. It was 57.9 last year, meeting that readiness benchmark of a 17 composite score, which is required for admission to a UNC system school. WorkKeys is now at 65.5. That went down from last year as well. And you can see when you take it comparison back to 2016-17, it is even more of a significant drop. And that's why we have the footnote that what we call the denominator, the population of students that we were considering for this analysis, changed with the implementation of the Every Student Succeeds Act from graduates to all students in 12th grade. And so that's why you're seeing a little bit of drop there last year and then again this year as well. And then when we combine ACT and WorkKeys together, you see it's at 65. Last year was 66.5. This is the measure that is used for school performance grades. And then math course rigor, again, had a change to the denominator being more specific. And so therefore it came up a little bit from last year, 1/10 of a point to 93. So moving on to the growth data, and of course this is important data that everyone is always very pleased to have available for their uses, and also to share and to look at what happens in our school through this lens. Because of course much of the focus and everything we've looked at so far has been achievement and performance, and this is looking at growth. Given where students started, where did they end? Did the students collectively, whether you're looking at a school or whether you're looking at a subgroup, or all of those schools combined, was growth achieved for the students across the state? So thankfully, we can see that the exceeded and the met both went up for 2018-19, and the did not meet went down. And so while it may not be the number of schools that one would prefer, it is definitely an indicator that our schools are moving in the right direction, and that their growth results are improving, and more schools are demonstrating exceeded and met for their growth status. Now, throughout the report, of course, we show this in different lenses, and of course the first one here is by school type, and looking to see if there are significant differences across the school types and the status of growth that is achieved. And you can see here the elementary has the most, 53.1 that met. The middle and the high school, of course, have smaller of those, but they had more that exceeded and more that did not meet. This slide is looking at growth by subgroup. So as part of ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act, we also run growth by the different subgroups. And you can see here looking at, for example, for the American Indian, which is the first one, that is basically saying that 11.1% of the schools that qualified within American Indian subgroup. And a school can have students who are a membership in one of these subgroups, but not have enough of them to actually have growth analysis. So these are the percentage of schools that actually qualified with a subgroup, and whether those subgroups met, exceeded, or did not meet. So now we come to school performance grades, and the next few slides go into the details of how we measure school performance grades. We've had many conversations about this over the years. So just briefly, of course, this is looking at level 3 and above, all of the EOGs and all of the EOCs, also the percentage of English learners who meet progress standard on the English proficiency test, and the percentage of students who graduate within 4 years, not 5 years, when we're looking at school performance grades. And then we're familiar with all of the school quality or student success indicators. A few we've already mentioned. The growth, of course, for the annual EOC assessment in biology for high schools, and of course the NC Math 3 passing grades, and the percentage of 12th graders who meet either the ACT standard or the WorkKeys standard. And of course, these school performance grades are reported out on a 15-point scale. And then just to reiterate, this summer, the General Assembly did pass a law that puts the 15-point scale permanently in state statute. So we will not continue to have the conversations about the 15-point scale. So here is the distribution for school performance grades for 2018-19. And again, you can see we're going in the right direction. We had an increase compared to the previous year of schools earning an A and earning a B, and a decrease in looking at the schools earning C's, D's, and F's. So that is indicating that we're going in the right direction with these results. Again, looking at this from a school perspective, you can see here the difference, and particularly with the high schools. And this is a recurring theme that we've had every year that we have done this presentation. And it is simply because the high school has additional measures. Elementary and middle do not. The 80% for achievement is very much coming from those end of grade and some end of course test scores for elementary and middle schools. High schools have all those other indicators that we just discussed, and so that helps with the outcome of those performance grades. There's been many conversations about the potential for other indicators for elementary and middle, but that proves to be a little bit more challenge in thinking of something that all elementary and middle schools have equal opportunity to access and show outcomes for. So this is looking at the school performance grades by subgroup. And so, of course, all subgroups, just like they get a growth score, they also get a letter grade. So this is the letter grades, again, looking by subgroup, and the same rule applies in that the subgroup gets a letter grade for the school if it meets the data requirements with potential number of students in that group. And then this is looking at the school performance grades by growth designation, and this again is not something that would surprise us. You know, you can see here very clearly the schools meeting or exceeding growth. They're the ones who get the bigger slice of the pie in looking at those letter A grades and the letter B grades. So even though growth and achievement are related but yet measuring two different outcomes, nevertheless you can see here that our schools that are doing well, of course, then also have the higher growth. And then the last slide for school performance grades is this one, and this is a requirement from the General Assembly that schools with grades 3 through 8 also report a reading and mathematics letter grade, and you can see this information here, and it's pretty consistent with what we've seen in the past. So moving to long-term goals, as a reminder, this is in the Every Student Succeeds Act state plan, and North Carolina set 10-year goals for improving academic achievement. And this, of course, is by subgroup, and you can see here that it's based on level 4 and above, as we've already mentioned, on the reading and mathematics test, both for grades 3 through 8 in high school, and then English learners' progress in attaining English language proficiency, and the 4-year cohort graduation rate again. So in looking at these goals and the results, it's important to note that these goals were designed to be ambitious but attainable. They are based on level 4 and 5, so that is a higher level than the level 3 that's on the school performance grades. If these goals were met, then the achievement gap between the high-performing and low-performing subgroups would decrease. But when I show you the results in a couple of moments, you're going to see that we're not meeting those interim progress targets as much as all of us would want us to. It's very difficult to set a goal and then to set interim progress and to really know the trajectory of how it's going to play out. So this is based on the information we had at the time that this was done, but as you see in these results, we're seeing way more not mets here than we would like to see. The grade 11 mathematics, of course, has the most met for the most subgroups, and you can see here that the reading is met by the Asian subgroup in grade 10 only. And then this next slide looks again with 3 other subgroups: the economically disadvantaged, the English learners, and students with disabilities. And you can see here the English learners are meeting, but the others are not. So the English learners, I will share, is one that we're continuing to look at because if it got to a point to where perhaps we needed to reset it, we don't think we necessarily do it this time because they are progressing, they are meeting those targets, they are moving forward, and that's what we want to see. But we also know that that is one where when we set it, we had limited information at that time to do that. And then the English learners' progress did meet as well, and so that's excellent news. And then looking at cohort graduation rate, we'll see that the Asians subgroup met that interim target, and the English learners again met. And in a few moments after this presentation ends, we'll have more information on the cohort graduation rate. So we're very much always interested in participation because if we do not have students participating in the assessments, then we're limited in the conclusions that we can draw from the data that is generated from the assessments. So this is a requirement through the Every Student Succeeds Act. It is part of federal law. Our schools take it very seriously, and they do an excellent job of trying to make sure that we assess every student that we are supposed to assess. And so when you look at this, we're not surprised to see that looking at the number of schools and the percent that met all participation requirements is 87%. And that is actually a very, very good percentage. Did not meet all, we have 13.0. That typically will be like one subgroup. It's not necessarily all across the board because we're looking at this as subgroup as well. So we also have information for our alternative schools, and if we'll remember from the State Board Policy Accountability 038, there's a couple of different ways that alternative schools can report their results, And the first one, of course, is they can use option B, which is using the North Carolina Developed Accountability Model. And for this year, this is designated as progressing, maintaining, and declining. And you'll see 57.1% of the schools based on that model are indicating that they are maintaining, with 19.5% progressing and 23.4% declining. Now, there are some alternative schools that avail themselves of option C, and those reports from all of those alternative schools is available in the board attachments, and you can go look at those independently. The last area that I'm going to cover before I turn it over to Dr. Emery is the federal and state low-performing designations. And of course, this is required of the ESSA state plan. And you can see here, we have the CSI low-performing schools, which is the bottom 5%. If you were to rank order the numeric value of the school performance grade, the CSI low graduation rate, TSI consistently underperforming subgroups, and then the TSI additional targeted support. What is notable here is some good news. If you see the TSI consistently underperforming subgroup, last year was a watch list, and that is because that design is to be 2 of 3 years. We didn't have enough data to do 2 or 3 years, and indeed this year we only have 2 years of data, but next year we'll finally have 2 or 3 years. But we made it a watch list last year, recognizing we were operating on 1 year of data, and it was at 1,740, and you can see that's decreased in 2019-20 to 1,464. And so we were very pleased to see that, and we're sure those schools that are off that list are very happy about that as well. One other note, the reason for 2019 the other designations are blacked out is because those do not come back for identification into the 2021-22 school year, and that is actually based on the 2020-21 data. Those designations are in a 3-year cycle. The TSI consistently underperforming subgroup, you'll see every year. It's an annual designation. The other 3 are every 3 years. And the reasoning for that, of course, is to give those schools time to have affect change in their schools and to show progress and then not be on those lists, rather than generating those lists every single year. But we can assure you that the Federal Policy and Monitoring Division, of course, is working with these schools, particularly the CSI low-performing schools. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Beverly Emery, who...
Dr. Howard?
Yes.
Let me first see if we have any questions from the board about this information before we go to the next one. Dr. Oxendine?
Thank you, Mr. Buxton, and thank you again for the report. I do need to get a mic. My question has to do with that fabulous information on the science results. I'm wondering if the department has considered interviewing science teachers
I think that would be an excellent idea.
and getting their perspectives on why these results are where we love them to be, and they've arrived there.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yes, and we've actually already started this conversation about what we're doing as a department to support science curriculum out throughout the schools in North Carolina, and how that actually is mirroring the efforts we have now in K-3 literacy, which you'll hear about later, about how we're actually trying to drive really good curriculum out in the schools. Not force schools to use it, because it's curriculum, it's a local choice, but really put out there the best curriculum that we know works for students. And so we're actually going to dig into those science strategies as well. And I hope to see in future years, as this work goes on now with the K-3 literacy efforts, we'll see similar results.
And I will always think, I mean, this is just my rough estimate, is that that it may have something to do with the reading passages. I don't know. I would be interested to find out.
Other questions? Mr. Chairman?
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. I would like to recognize a great friend of ours, Representative Craig Horn, co-chair of the House Education Committee. Representative Horn, thank you for being with us this morning. Appreciate it.
Please, Mr. Morris.
Dr. Howard, that was an amazing amount of information, and thank you for that. Quick question, in tracking ACT performance year over year, do we have statewide data on subgroups, the reading, math, English, and science, so that we could perhaps dig in and figure out if within the subgroups, we are trending in certain directions?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. And there's a spreadsheet on the accountability website that goes into much more detail. This is the very highest level. It goes into much more detail, and you can see all of the different components of the ACT as well.
I'll check that out, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, not Mr. Morris. Ms. Morris sits next to you, Mr. Smith is right there. Here we go. Ms. Camnitz.
Early days, since I know this, we're just starting to dig into this data, but is there going to be a way to pull out the districts that were so adversely affected by Florence and had their number of student days reduced and sort of get a feel for, take them out of the equation, look at them separately and perhaps some of the rest of the state without them? I mean, how much effect does that have on these numbers?
So I'm amiss, and I appreciate you bringing that point up because it was a very important point, and that is that SAS did do an analysis looking at the EVOS and looking at the potential impact for the days missed or the days waived from the hurricane, and it was determined that there was an impact for grade 3. And the conclusion thereof, they could see that it was around the beginning of grade 3 assessment. So go back to a year ago, of course, and we had hurricanes happen. And of course, some schools had to take that beginning of grade 3 assessment later. Some schools took it on time, but they were doing it under very stressful situations across the state. And so an adjustment was made for that grade 3, beginning of grade 3. So that was taken into account, yes. But there was not impact seen at the other grades or courses, and so none was taken there. And it really probably was the timing of that beginning of grade 3 at the beginning of the year.
Follow up.
So one other question.
Please.
I want to jump back to table, let's see, 16. Which is, way back, I'm sorry.
Is it slide 16?
Let me get a second look at it. Okay, it must, the numbers don't line up. I'm looking at the math, and let me see if I can just, without having it to look at. So the proficiency levels in math in 3 through 8 don't seem to me to match up with the jump that occurs in math 1 and math 3. If students are not proficient in the lower grades, then why such a jump when you get to the high school grades and all of a sudden you've got a much higher proficiency? Because it seems like the math builds on itself.
So I think that is a question that would best be answered by our content standards experts, which is Dr. Ms. Christy Lynch-Ebert, if she wouldn't mind just addressing that. But I will say while she's coming to the microphone that all of these assessments are independent assessments. You know, the way we present them, you think about them as maybe being tied together, but they're not tied together. They're independent assessments, even at the grades 3, 4, and 5 on those independent content standards. But perhaps Ms. Ebert will.
Okay, I'm going to introduce Ms. Beverly Vance, who is our section chief for Math, Science, and STEM, and she's going to speak to your questions as our content expert.
Ms. Vance, thank you.
Good morning. If you would repeat the question again so that I know exactly what I'm speaking to.
Well, now I've got in front of me what I need to have in front of me. So I'm looking at page 15 in the presentation. And just to start here, grade 6 math proficiency, 41, and then 44 in grade 7. And then when you look to end of course math, it jumps up to 56 and 46. And it seems that it seems that the proficiency levels in grades 6, 7, and 8 would be reflected in the proficiency levels in math 1 and math 3 as sort of a continuum.
Okay, so I'm going to try and make sure I understand your question first and that we are comparing the right things. Because if we are comparing why elementary students or middle school, elementary, middle, or high school, those different proficiency levels, first know that you're comparing different kids, even over those 3 years. And we're not looking at where the kids that you are observing right now in middle school or where they're going to be when they get to right. So you're not really comparing apples to apples. Okay? All right.
Mr. Duncan?
Looking at slide 31, if you look at the A graded and B graded schools, it's 32.4% for elementary school. If you go to middle, it's 28.4, which in and of itself is a statistically significant difference. Then you go to high school and it's 57.7. These numbers, I realize you could say, well, it happened to be a particularly smart group of kids in high school right now, but these numbers have actually stayed pretty consistent over a period of time. Can you provide some explanation or background about why there would be this kind of variance on A and B graded schools in these different levels of our educational system?
Right. So particularly for high school has other indicators. So if you think about the 80% and the 20%, so the 20% is the growth, 80% is everything else. So if we look at the test results across these three different types of schools, there may be some fluctuation, which I think we were just addressing in the previous conversation. But then take, for instance, in the high school, the math course rigor indicator. And if we can remember, it was what this year? 93.0, I believe, is that right? It was 93% of students are successfully passing NC Math 3. So if we're just, and this isn't, if we're just adding numbers up and doing simple averaging, which is not exactly what it is, but nevertheless, we all know that 93 is going to pull you up. So if you had 5 test scores and some were, and I'm thinking individually, if you had 5 individual test scores and you had some in the one in the 50s and one in the 60s and one in the 70s and maybe even one in the 80s, but that 93 is going to bring you up. And so what we're seeing with the high schools is, one, a factor of that math course rigor, which is very high for most schools, and then also just the opportunity for an additional measure, the ACT and the work keys. So that's giving additional, as well as cohort graduation rate. So when you have those additional measures, and we don't have those measures in elementary and middle, but I will say there was a good faith intent all around to get some additional measures for elementary and middle. And during the ESSA state plan design, there were conversations across the state with stakeholders. What can we have at elementary and middle to give more information about how our schools are doing. And it's just very challenging to have something. We don't have an ACT or a work keys assessment. We don't have a cohort graduation rate at elementary and middle. So from our perspective, that's what we're seeing, part of the difference there. Really, in making comparisons, it's probably best to look at elementary and middle compared to each other, and then just keep the high schools separate because they are being based on different criteria.
Well, if I could have a follow-up.
Follow-up.
It does suggest one of two things, perhaps. Should there be additional measures at elementary and middle school? Or alternatively, do we have the right measures for high school? Because the level of inconsistency is significant, far beyond statistically significant. And so it does cause us to think, do we need to explore more deeply whether or not there are other measures that are out there? And one that jumps to mind is in elementary school, you do have the NAEP nationally normed test every couple of years, in which North Carolina's math and reading scores tend to be higher than people think they're going to be. And so they tend to be right around, the middle of the states. Is that a legitimate measure? Are there other legitimate measures without getting back into over-testing our kids is the question maybe we can ask ourselves or start to think about those questions.
So if I may, if I could just share that with NAEP, it's given to a subset of schools in grades 4 and 8. And so, not even every individual student in those schools actually participate in the assessment. They're identified. And so no one student anywhere in the nation gets a score for NAEP.
Right.
And there are not school-level results. Now, we do have some districts that participate as a district, and so they have a larger sample. But again, it's not every school in that district, I don't think. So that would be the difficulty in having NAEP factored into this. But I also think that, elementary, middle, yes, absolutely. And like I said, there's been a good faith effort to have conversation about additional indicators. The high school measures are trying to get at, are students prepared to leave high school? So I think considering and having conversations around the intention of those measures for high school would be key to that conversation.
Just
Dr. Oxendine.
one more minute. To your point, Mr. Duncan, Dr. Howard, did we not last year in our ESSA discussions, or year before last, I can't recall, did we not give some consideration to the inclusion of student attendance somewhere?
Mm-hmm. Yes, there was some conversation around that, and some states have done that, but it did not end up in North Carolina's plan.
But isn't it factored somewhere in a report in North Carolina?
I think my colleagues, not I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer, but some of my colleagues are involved in that work, but it is not part of accountability.
Okay,
Got it.
thank you.
One question before we bring up Dr. Emery. Understanding that every school and every district has its own individual story with this year's results, given the 3-year look that you've provided, it kind of looks like the state story is we're stuck in neutral. And maybe it's more like when my kids learn stick, and there's a little bit of lurch forward and a little bit of roll back, but in general, not a lot of progress. The one place we don't have a lot of 3-year data, or the 3-year look, is in the subgroup data, and I was just wondering if we're seeing any good gains in closing gaps among any of our different demographic groups in the data.
We can look at that, and I think, the subgroup data is what we're always asked about, and perhaps we should turn our attention to and do more in that arena. Like I said, the information is on our website, but breaking it down and looking specifically, and I do think local schools do this very well, and local districts do this very well, where they could say, this subgroup is a subgroup that we're seeing the biggest gap with. But we absolutely could do that.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. Let's go ahead and bring up Dr. Emery, and we'll talk about, I think we're on the ISD, or our federal designations. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You were just talking about driving a stick shift, so I ask you to stay along for the ride here for what will seem a little bit like that. First of all, we have multiple definitions, and Dr. Howard just talked about the federal definition, and my part here is to talk about the state definition for low-performing schools and districts. As you can see here, we have an increase in the number of schools who are on this list, but I am certain this is hot off the press yesterday late and this morning. Once we're able to disaggregate, this pattern is probably going to be what we've seen in years past, where we definitely have schools that have come off the list and new schools that have come on the list. We're excited in our division and our side of the agency to tell you that while it looks like we have one additional low-performing district, we had 4 districts come off this list. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this time to give them a shout out. I'm sorry, but it's important, these folks that have worked really hard to be recognized. And so I just want to say congratulations to Halifax, Anson, Washington, and Caswell. The final 2 with some significant reductions to pull themselves off the low-performing district list. However, given the number, what I'm also here to tell you is that 4 came off and 4 came on, And we include the +1, which is the Innovative School District, and Dr. Ellabeer will talk to you more about that shortly. The good news here is that where we do have consistent measures, and again, recurring, low-performing, are those schools that have met low-performing status for 2 of the last 3 years. We do see some reduction there. I believe that's about a 3% reduction year over year, and that is good news and a positive for us to capitalize on. Also, you will see the same dance with charters. These are not the same schools over time. There is those that make progress come off the list, and then those that land back on the list. We're excited in district and regional support about this new structure. We've really only been in place since about April of this year, and this data historically will give us good focus and target for how we get out and support these districts and schools. And so we look forward to continuing that partnership. Questions?
Any questions before we get to ISD? Ms. White?
Just wanted to make a comment and wanted to make colleagues aware that the small committee that Chairman Davis and Vice Chair Duncan set up under the leadership of J.B. Buxton and myself to examine ISD and school turnaround has begun its work for the fall. We had the opportunity to meet this morning to talk about strategies for intervention in a more comprehensive, long-term approach using the data that's being released this fall. I just want to thank our folks at DPI for taking a really hard look at the data to look at what we can do to be more accountable to the schools that serve our students, and we're excited about the work that will be coming. And in October, colleagues will be looking at what we're doing as far as restart and renewal, and are those approaches effective. So we're super excited about that. I will say one of the things that gives me the most pause in this slide is the fact that under continually low-performing charter schools, which follows under my committee, that we have added 10 to the list of schools that are continually low-performing, and that is the call for additional work about what we're doing to support those schools, and might I add, holding their feet to the fire in the accountability sector.
Thank you, Ms. White. Thank you, Dr. Emery. Dr. Ellabeer.
Good morning to everyone. I am here to share with you information about the ISD qualifying list for 2019.
Dr. Ellabeer, before you go, if I can remind my board members, my colleagues, of one thing.
Yes, sir.
As you remember, we have been working, the State Board and the department has been working with the General Assembly to take a look at the ISD process and legislation. And so as you look at this list, understand that there's a conference committee around a bill that did not come to agreement, House and Senate, but a conference committee has been appointed where we could be choosing anywhere from 0 to 1 to 4 schools for next year, depending on the outcome of that committee. So just understand that some of this is a little bit of fluid depending upon the wishes of the legislature.
And based on the current legislation, we have a qualifying list that we'd like to share today. The first criteria for the qualifying list, of course, it had to be in the lowest 5% of all schools in the state of North Carolina. This includes all and part of grade levels K through 5. They did not exceed or meet growth expectations during one of the last 3 previous years. The next thing is they did not adopt a reform model from the North Carolina reform models that we have for each LEA to be able to participate, such as restart, transformation, turnaround, and school closure. There are schools that are both in the rural and the urban schools, and it cannot be a school that is already, an LEA that already has a school within the ISD. Based on the information, I'd also like to share the timeline with you today. We are actually giving you the list of the qualifying schools. Does not mean that they are going into the ISD. There are just the list of schools that would be considered for the ISD. Superintendents have been contacted. I've called yesterday and spoken to most of them, or left a voice message and then had some follow-up calls by our team members if I was not able to speak with them personally, but they were notified that their schools would be showing up on the list. And of course, we do have to start our application process for the ISO and work on the letters that we have for the ISO and the criteria that they must follow in order to be considered as a partner with the ISD. This is our school list. I do need to, based on late breaking news, take off Hosky Elementary and Orem Middle School. Those two schools will no longer be in consideration or on the qualifying list, but these are the additional schools that are. And we are still in the process of collaborating with our legal team and as well as other stakeholders to talk about other criteria that we would be using to determine the selection into the ISD. Currently, we are under consideration for 1 to 4 schools to be admitted to the ISD, depending on the legislators' moves. The performance will be looked at. That includes school leadership. We'll look at their NESIS information, EVOS data, and as well as student outcomes. The culture and climate, the surveys, such as for the North Carolina Teachers Working Condition Survey, professional development, teacher and student attendance, and any other information that the school may have to share with us from the parent community on surveys. We will use the comprehensive needs assessment process to actually get a baseline for those things that are strengths and areas for growth. We will look in the federal programs at their resources to ensure that they are sufficiently and adequately using and implementing their plans according to the resources that they have available. If they have third grade, we will also look at the M-Class data, K-3 literacy, iStation information, and then of course we will do student discipline from Power School. Any other questions?
You would just back up 2 slides.
Sure.
If we can, and just remind us of our process over the next couple months.
Sure. For some reason, it won't go back on me. Maybe I went too far.
While we're waiting on that, just let me get any clarifying questions on this list. Dr. Oxendine.
Remind me again, going back to the list of schools, that list represents the extraction of LEAs previously captured in the ISD, is that correct? Except Orem.
Yes, and very good question. I did mean to share, we go over the Restart list, the alternative school, charter schools, all of those schools are extracted from this qualifying list.
You just overlooked Orem.
Yes, and that's why it's coming off the list.
Here you go, Dr. Alvey. Just remind us of the next few months and the work ahead.
So the next few months, what we're going to do is actually, this month is going to be a tight month, and we're going to be having the comprehensive needs assessment. We've already talked to Dr. Emery and Dr. Cynthia Martin and her teams about the schedule for the comprehensive needs assessments. We are going to be gathering additional information from the schools and meeting with the public as well as the county commissioners and the superintendent's leadership teams in order to gather information about these schools, especially on areas such as leadership, and not just only in the school level, but in the district level as well. And we will make a determination and give information to the superintendent of the school that we're planning to carry forward and bring here to the board for approval.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Elby.
Yes.
All right, that is SLA 1. We will vote on that tomorrow, action on first reading. SLA 2 is our second report from 2018-2019, and that's our cohort graduation rate. Dr. Howard.
Thank you. And while Mr. Pollard is bringing forth the PowerPoint, I will go ahead and share a reminder, of course, that the cohort graduation rate is required by definition in federal law, and it is an adjusted actual cohort graduation rate that identifies a cohort of first-time ninth graders in a particular school, and then the cohort is adjusted as students move in and students exit. We do this calculation based on that beginning cohort denominator, and students are approved to be removed from that denominator if there is documentation that they have transferred out to another diploma granting institution, if there is documentation they have immigrated to another country, transferred to a prison or juvenile facility, or are deceased. And so those are the only reasons that someone can be removed from that denominator. So for the 2018-19 school year, the cohort graduation rate is 86.5, which is a 0.2 increase from last year. And you can see here we have all of the various subgroups showing the change from the previous year as well. So we see lots of green, so that is really good news that we are seeing so many of our subgroups that have increased their cohort graduation rate for the 2018-19 school year. We do have 3 areas that are red there, of course. The American Indian, we've had some conversations internally, and we're not sure, but we would like to note, of course, that is a very small population. And small populations, you're more likely to see some fluctuations in the data. And of course, 2 or more races is in the same category there as well. And then academically gifted, of course, remember, they're greater than 95%, so this 0.1 actual decrease is not as concerning as it possibly would look. And then just as a reminder, we do also calculate a 5-year cohort graduation rate, and that gives all of us time to work for an additional year to see students who possibly graduate in that year following the 4-year, and that typically goes up every year as well. We would expect it to, and that is 87.9. So if you really look at last year's cohort and to where they are now, we have graduated more than we had at the end of last year. So that concludes the report on cohort graduation rate.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. Any questions? Board members, advisors? Okay, seeing none, thank you, and we'll move right into SLA 3, our Read to Achieve Local Alternative Assessments. Board members, you may remember this is an annual list that we approve for use by districts. Dr. Howard.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Buxton. And this, of course, is a chart that is presented to the State Board every year for approval. These are assessments that local districts and schools can use throughout the school year to determine if students meet the qualifications for Read to Achieve. And the list this year, we have 2 new assessments on the list, and they are Lexia Rapid and the American Reading Company Independent Reading Level Assessment Framework. So in order to be added to the list, these 2 assessments have to present a Lexile study that shows the assessment's score that correlates to the Lexile level that is determined by the end of grade 3 reading assessment. So these 2 assessments have met that criteria and are being presented to be added to the list.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. Board members, any questions? This is an action on first reading item for us tomorrow. Okay, hearing none. Thank you, Dr. I will give you a little break before we bring you back up. Our last action item is SLA 4, bringing back to the table policies governing services for children with disabilities, autism spectrum disorder. You may remember that last month, Ms. Thomas asked us to postpone this item on the agenda so that she could seek additional feedback from stakeholders. And in fact, a stakeholder meeting was held and some amendments and revisions done to this policy, which she will go through today. And Ms. Thomas, I believe you're going to talk about that as well as the implementation plan.
Yes, yes, I am.
Thank you.
So good morning, Chairman Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, State Board members. Get started in a second. We did hold a stakeholder meeting on the 22nd of August. And that stakeholder meeting had approximately 35 entities that we included in the invitation to come be a part of that stakeholder group. We invited, thanks, Lawrence. We invited organizations, so nonprofit organizations that support students with disabilities, in particular those involved with autism. We invited parents individually. We invited parent organizations. We invited our advisory council to the state board. We invited LEA personnel. Of those entities, of the 35 that we invited, we had 8 respondents that participated, and 3 of them brought a friend. So we wound up with 11 outside authentic stakeholders being a part of that stakeholder meeting. We did have 3 regrets from 3 folks that were unable to make the meeting. We had our staff there, and that staff consisted of our state consultant for school psychology, for the 4 state consultants for autism, our previous state consultant for occupational therapy, who's in a different role but did that work with us, as well as the section chief, Dreama McCoy, for this section where the autism support lives, our assistant director, Matt Hoskins, and myself. We participated by sitting at the back of the room, literally, and answering policy or legality questions. So we were not involved in the conversation. We wanted this to be the conversation of the stakeholders. I will tell you, it is the most engaging and productive stakeholder group I've ever been a part of. So that was refreshing to have that good, positive experience. And we actually spent some time talking about why necessarily being invited to a stakeholder group is not enticing to a stakeholder, and what we need to do to help engage that. But the feedback we got from those present that day was that it had been a very effective process. It had been very welcoming. It was a safe environment. Everyone's voice counted. We started with norms. We had 2 facilitators. And so it really turned out to be just a very exciting day for us. So at the end of the day, or about middle of the day actually, what the group did was provide concerns, and they sort of did a flooding of information of all the concerns they had, where they had problems with language, what they saw as problematic, what they had heard from other entities that might have been problematic. That narrowed down into about these 4 areas that were prioritized by that group as the areas they wanted to tackle. And so we had heard the conversation, you as board members heard some feedback around it being more restrictive. And so we kind of got to the nuts and bolts of where that was coming from their comments. That early developmental period history being a concern. And then the Part C of the policy requirement where they felt the language was problematic. Generally clarifying language to ensure there was not misinterpretation, and then concerns around qualifications of staff that would be conducting, in particular, the behavioral evaluation. So they narrowed it down to 4. They broke out into 3 groups, and they problem solved, and they came up with language changes, with recommendations within the policy we had presented to you previously as to where they would like to see changes made. I've highlighted in bold just to make it a little bit easier for you, but in your packet of information, you have everything we've done. You have the highlighted, the cross through. It's a big mess right now, but there's a lot of work that's gone into that policy, so it feels like a productive mess, if you will. So the ask here was not that they necessarily disagreed with the language around the behavioral assessment, but they wanted that to be a definition. They wanted that to catch attention, that we were defining who would conduct those behavioral assessments, and in particular related to autism. So the language that that group added was conducted by trained and knowledgeable personnel. And they felt like that narrowed the focus enough that districts would have some guidance to ensure that not just anyone was doing those assessments for the behavioral piece. And we fully supported that. Second place they brought back a recommendation was around the definition and adding in the language currently or by history. And that brought about a lot of conversation with the group when our staff came back into the room to kind of problem solve with them. And their concerns, and valid concerns, if you have a student whose early history you don't know, either because they've been in foster care, they've moved from another place, there aren't people there to talk about their history, they didn't want that to be a barrier. We felt like that was implied, but we were very happy to make sure we put language in that waived all doubt that we would look at current or history as well. The next place was where we had listed in item A, there are 3 areas listed of markers for autism. We had moved then into the repetitive patterns of behavior, interest, and activities, and previously this item had said at least 2. This is where we finally were able to address their concerns, where they saw this exceeding IDEA, because IDEA has 4 markers. They saw this as that 4th marker, where we saw this as different areas to meet that marker. We were very happy to move to 1 or more, and that was in total agreement of the group. And then secondly, on this part, they did not like the significantly atypical. They felt like atypical is atypical, and we didn't need to define that further. So that was struck from the proposed policy as well. And then the last part, instead of saying the above symptoms, just talking about all those symptoms generally. And then this probably was the piece that we had the most conversation around and the biggest change to. And again, it's going back to that early history, making sure that this isn't masked. We heard some feedback around girls overcompensating and therefore might not be as easily identified or as frequently identified as boys, because girls would have a tendency. There's some research out there that says as females we try to mask things to meet the norms. We came to agreement with that language and then added an additional sentence about manifesting those characteristics after age 3, because that happens sometimes. And if you don't have that early history to reflect back on maybe changes that were seen but not really attributed, and then as the child gets older, you kind of think back to maybe that was there already. But then making sure that we still put that criteria in, that A and B of that part of the policy still has to be met. You can't just identify based on this one area. I am happy to say that as a group, we were all in total agreement. DPI staff felt like these were really good, clean changes. We appreciated the work and the efforts of that stakeholder group. And there was 100% consensus with the people in the room that these changes were appropriate, and they have seen this prior to it coming to you today, and I've received no feedback from anyone. Each of those entities were asked to share back out with their stakeholders as they had opportunity to or had access to get feedback, and I have not had any concerns to date around these changes that we've accepted. One of the things we would like to make sure we follow up with is our implementation plan, and I talked about that a little bit in August. I had some feedback, heard some comments, and it happened even before August, around looking at a pilot and whether we should roll this policy change out to as a pilot. As a department, we have concerns about that, because if we do that, when we pick those districts that may be pilots, that makes some inequity across the state. So in essence, we would be looking at different assessments across the state for the same area of disability, and students would either get caught up in starting one criteria and moving to another and having to start over, or do some retesting, or maybe not even meet eligibility if that team was very rigid in their interpretation. We feel like it is much more in line with creating a free and appropriate public education and doing our due diligence with Child Find to have a unified one policy that we're looking at, that all people
are following. It's on us to create that training and that information and that clarification so that people are doing a good job out in the field with these guidelines that we've created. So I'd just like to throw that out, put that on the table. As far as our implementation plan, we set a goal of having this established by September 1, and we actually had it done in August, right after that meeting, which was a productive day all in all. We will be embedding identification, clarification, guidelines around this new policy into any autism training that we currently have or will develop in the next couple of months. One of our goals is to create a voiceover for administrators on a PowerPoint presentation that they can go online and look at so that they've got that information as well. We will provide guidance documents for regular ed teachers, special ed teachers, and parents around what those changes mean and how they should be interpreted and what those assessments really are looking for. So total clarification around the changes. We have set aside a couple of sessions at our conference in November to address policy and the policy changes and what that means. So giving more opportunities for teachers and parents, institutes of higher ed, agencies, advocates, anyone who comes to our conference to have access to that information. And then those PowerPoints that PowerPoint will be presented up on our website as well for information for folks who may not be at the conference. That parents guidance document, in working with our parent training center, ECAC, would be a goal to have that parent guide done by December 1 in collaboration with parent organizations so we are ensured that it's parent friendly. Then looking at full implementation July 1, 2020, and additional training during our summer institutes as needed and as required. I will add that one of the things we ask of this group that gathered on the 22nd would be their willingness to maintain as a stakeholder group and continue to work with us, because a lot of things we heard during our forums and during our feedback and a lot of comments that you received and concerns had to do with not really policy but implementation. So what are we doing to make sure teachers have the appropriate training out in the field to address the area of autism instruction and programming for students with autism, and how can we do a better job with that? So this whole group offered to stay together and to provide that feedback and be a working stakeholder group with us. We even had a representative from Autism Speaks out of state who said, if I can do it online or virtually, I would love to be a part of that. And that was exciting because that gets us even out of our state into more of a national focus where it would help us ensure we're aligning with what's happening across the country. One of the issues that came up for us that I've really tried to reflect a lot on was what happened in that, what we've used as a traditional information loop around this policy. I've been here for 12 years. I don't believe I've ever experienced the concern that parents didn't know. And we used the same vehicles we've always used. We've used our districts to push out information. We did the newspaper. We pushed it out to councils and agencies and asked that they put it on listservs. And we really aren't sure what happened with that breakdown, but what we know is that we need to do something different. So because of all the learning we've done from this policy change, we have created a new listserv that we will be pushing out again through those entities I just described, but with already buy-in from a lot of agencies and nonprofits and organizations who are willing to then join this listserv and push it out to their listserv. So we'll have an information for parents around exceptional children. So anytime we do any policy change, proposed policy change, are looking for parent engagement in stakeholder groups, information that parents need to know that we need to make sure it gets past that district level to them, that it will be pushed out through this listserv. And so it's on our website as to how to connect to that, and it's listed as exceptional children information for parents. And so hopefully this week we will start that communication process. I don't know. I still think I need a banner on a plane flying across the state, but that's a little costly. I can't use federal dollars for that. But we really are working to get this communication out and make people aware so we can have a vehicle to respond to parents. That's my update. I'm happy to take questions you may have now.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. I'd like to split the questions into two parts if we could and start with the policy. So we are voting on the policy in the identification policy. The implementation plan, I want to take as the second set of questions. So first, any questions on policy change, the language revisions you saw in here? Ms. White and then Ms. Kamitz.
Just wanted to thank you for your responsiveness to the feedback from concerned, particularly parents and folks that have children in their home who have myriad of disabilities, have a difficult enough time just negotiating the day-to-day struggles of life. And so the fact that you took a pause and listened to concerned providers across our state is a reflection upon your commitment to these students and their families. So thank you for coming out with something that I feel is a much better policy for those families that do have children with autism.
That's important to us as well. I mean, if we aren't supporting the parents, then we can't support the students. So thank you for that.
Ms. Kamitz.
As always, Ms. White was much more eloquent than I could ever be, but that's exactly what I was going to say, is thank you so much for reassuring all of the stakeholders out there and us. And I know a lot of time went into that leading up to this, but thank you for being so responsive.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. Actually, I'm not sure where my question falls, whether it's policy or implementation.
Well, any other policy-related questions? All right, then we'll just segue right into the
So
broader
let me just go
conversation.
for it. Okay. My question has to do with a point you made previously, which piqued my interest. It has to do with the need for individuals who are assessing having specialized knowledge and skill sets.
In the behavior piece, yes.
Now, can we be assured that each LEA has that body of?
They either have that body or they have that access. So one of the conversations we had around this, and if you'll notice it says by trained and knowledgeable personnel. It doesn't list teachers or specific district levels. So they might actually need someone out in the private sector to come in and do that evaluation. Folks, for example, that have been trained by Teach have a different skill set for looking at behaviors. There's a training that a company does that's specifically around nonviolent crisis intervention for students with autism. So there are lots of vehicles and lots of training that our districts have already had that builds that capacity. So it may not be necessarily that school psychologist that would do that or that behavior specialist, but they should have access. If they don't, then the state would be able to give them recommendations for resources, folks close to them that would be able to provide that evaluation.
If I could have
Please follow up.
a quick follow-up. One of the concerns that I recall had to do with, and I'm probably not going to capture this correctly, but it seemed to have to do with misidentifying certain characteristics that may not manifest in all settings.
And so that's where we went to this. This was the place where we were getting so much feedback, this section B or part B of the proposed policy, where it was around that stereotypical behavior and the masking. And that also came up when we talked about the history of looking not only at just the developmental history, but currently as well. It was involved with that student who, I mentioned females, who may mask that behavior because culturally they do a better job of adhering to what the required norms are, but outside of that classroom, it may be exhibited. There was a lot of concern also with from some of the parents we had around this Part B, where it was talking about interests. So if my child has one friend, does that mean they have an interest or they're relating to their peers, therefore they wouldn't meet this criteria? And that's not at all what this is intended to do. So we had a lot of that conversation around this part, and this is the resolution that the team came up with.
You worked hard on this.
We did.
Thank you.
We did. A lot of people worked hard on this, though.
I want to recognize Mr. Ford, who's on the line.
Hey, and I appreciate that, Mr. Chair. So I probably lack a lot of knowledge on this, so I'm going to sound like I don't know what I'm talking about because I don't. But one of the pieces of feedback that we did get, which was policy related, was the concern about conformity of the criteria to the DSM, which I guess is like a some sort of guidebook for categorizing certain exceptionalities that's relatively universally recognized. And so I just wondered if you got any feedback with regard to that and if you had any responses to that notion.
With this group, on the 22nd, we did not, we worked through where they had the concerns. And again, they wanted to make sure we weren't going out of the scope of IDEA. When we talked about where we pulled the information from the DSM-5, which is a diagnostic manual that identifies all areas of disability, by using some of the markers that they identify there, we are also linking back more clearly with what might happen in an evaluation outside a school setting. So when that information comes into the school, we're all looking at the same components. So it really makes it cleaner and more in alignment if a private evaluation has happened with a non-school entity under the area of autism, because those IEP teams are also always required to look at that information if it's coming from an outside evaluator to consider those recommendations or those identifications that have happened. We also talked a whole lot about, in education, we look at eligibility for special ed. We are not diagnosing. And so there is a difference there in the clinical diagnostic model as opposed to the educational implementation model. Did that answer your question?
It does, right? Especially by drawing the distinction between diagnostic and trying to figure out how to render services. I think the spirit of it came out of a lot of things, but one of which was, I guess, the DSM's guidance, particularly or recognizing groups, as we talked about, so African Americans or other groups whose manifestations may be different, may be indirect. And so how oftentimes they may not get recognized within that model. But it sounds like, you correct me if I'm wrong, you kind of built in some of that into the way that you're approaching the policy implementation. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. We did our best.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Ms. Kamnitz.
I was going to ask the question about, had you considered a partial rollout of this, but you've answered that quite clearly, and I understand. I think that makes great sense. But I will say, this has been a very long process, and
Yes,
it looks like a very tight implementation schedule. So are you confident that you can get this done by January 1st? Because is there an urgency to get it done this school year versus waiting until a year from now?
There's an urgency from the field because they feel like this is a much better, cleaner, clearer implementation of eligibility requirements. And so we've got practitioners who are saying, please let us go ahead and move with this because it really makes a difference in some of our identification. We believe there will be children that are identified now because of the change in policy, that because of those other markers, like we didn't know what happened up to age 3, that may have kept them from being identified. We also just didn't want to sit on a policy for 6 months. We feel confident that we're going to have this done. In fact, all of the FAQs that we've done, all of the questions we've received, that guidance document's pretty much in play. We have 4 very strong consultants for autism. 3 of them are here today. And I can tell you they've probably already started working on this, even though we've got that projection of November. So I think we're going to be in really good shape. I wouldn't bring it to you if I thought we were going to fail with that timeline.
All right, board members, this is I'm sorry, Ms. Morris, thank you.
Yeah, on behalf of classroom teachers in K-5, I really do thank you for this work because this is something that is near and dear to our hearts in K-5. I'm a 2nd grade teacher, so we're working with the students when they first enter the school system and working on this.
James Ford
has left the conference.
With regards to your stakeholder group, I would encourage you to have teachers sit on the group, especially classroom teachers, not just EC teachers, because a lot of the students with autism are in our classes for the majority of their day with their placement. And so I would love to have teachers have a voice in those conversations. And then my second point is with regards to the K-3 literacy initiatives that we're rolling out. We, from my perspective, do a great job with behavior interventions with students with autism in K-5. That seems like we have cracked that a little bit better than the learning piece. And we experience a lot of situations where we don't know how to work with students with autism once they experience literacy setbacks, especially when we get into the second grade time when we're learning to read not just identification but the more complex text with the language skills. And so I would love to see some work coming out with your implementation on literacy programs and interventions for the autism learning situation.
So let me address the teacher part first. We actually invited teachers, EC directors, other personnel that would be a part of those teams. And I just think we were on a tight time schedule trying to get that scheduled between the board meeting and this board meeting. And I think we got caught in school. Okay. But they are on the list. So let me clarify, that whole list of 35 will continue to be invited to that stakeholder group, not just the 11 that showed up, that were able to come that day. Secondly, I believe we already have some of that work going on, but that's part of what we want to continue the stakeholder group in, is to dig deeper to see where we really do have those gaps that teachers aren't getting from what we're already doing with our training, and how we're helping build that team support structure at the district level, and how we need to push down more to teachers. So noted, and we will not, that's not going to go off the radar.
Thank you, Ms. Morris, for the great comments. Mr. Smith.
Hi, quick question about the revised policy change. Slide 7, item number C there, uses a word that I had not noticed in other parts of the presentation. It uses the word symptoms, and I've seen language, characteristics, features, behaviors, but I hadn't seen the word symptoms. And I wondered if any of your stakeholders discussed or had any concerns about the word symptoms as the term used to identify kids with autism. And I'm outside of my
right,
here,
right. So that's in the old policy, I believe, because it wasn't a strike through. It was at least what we had proposed to you before. They did not have any concerns with that. One thing I would like to note, we had a parent heavily engaged with us and actually took what we did that day, and the next morning I received a very clean copy with her words and her language that she felt there were just a couple of tweaks that would be more parent-friendly. And so that was not noted. So no one has brought that to our attention. I don't know how else to, I mean, that did not come up. That's the one thing we didn't talk about. That was one of the words we didn't talk about. But we did not see that as problematic, because in our other, if you'll look in our policies, other areas of disability, it may also say symptoms, because there is a symptomatic approach to looking at what's happening with the student. So,
Okay.
Sure.
We will vote on this tomorrow. Thank you for the great input, great questions and feedback. And Ms. Thomas, I would say that you have a board that if for any reason on this timeline you are looking to make adjustments, we would certainly welcome you to come back and
absolutely
suggest any adjustments given the tight timeline as Ms. Kamnitz notes.
And I would just like to say thank you to the board for your patience and your feedback, but also allowing us some extra time and being patient with us as we work to really try to meet the needs of the concerns that were out in the field. And I hope that communication loop that we've put in place now will help to alleviate a lot of concerns like this down the road. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Thomas. Board members, 2 more agenda items, 1 discussion and 1 update. SLA 5, I'll call Dr. Howard back up on our alternative schools accountability model option for 2019-20. So remember, you saw some information about the alternative accountability model for last year that's part of SLA 1. This is looking prospectively at this year for next year's report.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Buxton. So this is in reference to the Accountability 038 policy of the State Board of Education. There are 95 alternative schools in North Carolina, and they have the option to participate in the state model by receiving the school performance grade, or they may do option B, which is that NCDPI developed accountability model for alternative schools, or they may design their own alternative accountability model. And going forward for 2019-20, we have 25 schools that are availing themselves of the option to create their own model. So this agenda item is to ask for approval of that. It is required that they notify us and let us know when we share, of course, with the board for approval of their intentions for accountability. This is as going forward for 2019-20. And of those 25 that have designed their own models, a synopsis of their model highlighting how they will address achievement and growth, which is required in the state board policy, is available in the attachment for this item.
Thank you, Dr. Howard. This is discussion this month, action next. Any questions for Dr. Howard about the item in the list that's here? Seeing none, we'll move to our last, which is our requested update, and as Dr. Galloway comes up, just a bit of history, and especially for our new advisors. Back in January and February of this year, we took a look at kind of the state of reading in North Carolina, and in March, we adopted a framework for action that we, together with the department, would move forward on. The intent was to have monthly updates on this from an implementation standpoint. Between a July call meeting and some tight agendas in the coming months, we are kind of getting back on track and looking at our framework. So we're not going to ask Dr. Galloway to cover all 9 areas in detail. I'm going to ask her to make some kind of summary or highlight comments. Board members have had this and advisors have had this in your packet. And then I'm just going to make sure we're all on the same page on the timeline moving forward. So after you make some comments.
Okay.
Right.
Good morning, Chair Davis, Vice Chair Duncan, Superintendent Johnson, state board members, and colleagues and collaborative partners in the room, including my online listeners and my K-3 literacy team who are online listening as well, who have been working very hard behind the scenes on every element that I'll talk to you about today. Each of you should have the collaborative guiding framework in front of you for the early literacy education. Today I'll do a crosswalk for each of the elements included in the collaborative actions across the agency and the State Board of Education. The first element is to develop a statewide definition of high-quality reading instruction. The actions outlined will allow us to adopt a statewide definition of high-quality reading instruction and move forward with a visibility plan. That's top priority within the guiding framework for early literacy education. Providing this guidance and support for the instructional practices based on the science of reading and professional learning will put knowledge of high-quality reading instruction into the hands of teachers to change outcomes for our youngest scholars. This is a top goal within our division. We have strategic planning and capacity building efforts underway, as well as collaboration across divisions, and our goal is to present a draft definition in December based on stakeholder input and expert knowledge. Feel free to stop me anytime between or in the midst of what I'm talking about. Element 2 within the collaborative guiding framework is to improve focus of reading instruction in teacher preparation programs. Since I came from a teacher prep program in special education as well as general education, this one is near and dear to my heart. The actions that are outlined would require state board policy changes, a potential reallocation of some physical resources and possibly personnel resources moving around within the within our division. Collaborative efforts across divisions at the agency have already been underway in order to update the comprehensive reading plan. We will continue to involve stakeholders in those decisions to determine the definition of high-quality evidence-based training and include systematic and explicit instruction into the comprehensive reading plan. While this may require some reallocation of resources and additional personnel, it is important for our division to partner with those EPPs to align the efforts and provide training in the early literacy intervention and practices to ensure reading proficiency for all students. We have seen in many other states that this has worked very well, and we want to make sure that our division partners with those EPPs. Element 3 is to improve summer reading camp quality. The outlines actioned here would require possibly a state board policy change, potential reallocation of physical resources, and of course, again, personnel. Our team has worked with Barbara Foreman and her team from Florida. We developed a reading camp repository with resources, support, and guidance for effective reading camps. We highlighted effective instruction at our conference, and we will provide an opportunity for districts this year to submit their plans and provide feedback. moving hopefully into establishing a process for approval of the plans to receive funding upon state board policy approval. Element 4 is to provide reading coach supports in low-performing schools and districts. The actions that are outlined here would possibly require a state board request for legislative change, the potential of reallocation of physical resources, and then possibly even exploring a potential for a budget request. Our division can expand Wolfpack Works with the virtual coaching model, as well as partner with NCAT to build capacity for teachers to become literacy facilitators and leverage the training provided through NC SIP and other training based on the science of reading. Element 5 is to expand partnerships to support beginning teachers. The actions outlined here would require potential reallocation of physical resources. Based on the results from our pilot program with Wolfpack Works, we will make any necessary changes and adjustments. We will continue that evaluation of the program, and then we will collaborate with other institutes of higher education to expand the program. Element 6 is to ensure high-quality reading curriculum and instructional materials in elementary schools. The actions that are outlined here would require state board policy, possible reallocation of physical resources and personnel. Ensuring high-quality reading instructional materials is definitely one of the highest needs and the top priorities included in this framework. A common problem of practice in many states, including North Carolina, is that students in K-3 are not accessing a high-quality literacy instructional support. It doesn't support their ability to meet the demands of the standards. Studies have shown strong evidence that putting strong curriculum into the hands of excellent teachers can and does lead to an increased academic impact for students. Adopting high-quality instructional materials and providing those supports for teachers needs to effectively leverage the high-quality materials, and that can dramatically improve outcomes for our youngest scholars. Effective instructional core has two components: excellent content and excellent teaching. Studies have shown that K-3 teachers are spending 4.5 hours per week creating or sourcing materials for daily reading blocks, developing their own, or finding materials. 94 have reported using Google, and 87% have reported using Pinterest. This approach to sourcing materials limits the opportunities of teachers to coordinate and collaborate. It is critical to support the teachers in comprehensive literacy instruction using strong materials for both foundational reading skills and reading comprehension. Working with strong curricular materials can positively affect the quality of instruction and will increase the use of high-quality complex text. Element 7, in very close conjunction with that, is to explore a statewide system of training in reading for teachers, principals, and reading coaches on the science of reading. The actions outlined here would require reallocation of physical resources and state board approval. In line with high-quality core instruction, it is a top priority to equip our teachers and administrators with knowledge of the science of reading and how our youngest scholars learn to read. We are working to partner with districts and increase partnerships with institutes of higher education to incorporate this training on the science of reading. Also working with the EC Division with NC SIP and with partnering with NCAT to leverage teachers, administrators, and faculty knowledge with effective implementation models, including in-depth professional learning, is critical. Element 8 is providing flexibility in the state funding to support district action on reading. Last meeting, the state board approved the policy allotment changes to allow some flexibility. Providing districts that flexibility can support their individual needs to support K-3 literacy. The allotment policy change provided districts flexibility to support K-3 literacy efforts that were aligned with this framework. State board approval of policy change for flexibility in summer reading camp program would be necessary to consider options to expend unused summer reading camp money as well. And then finally, element 9 is to ensure access to high-quality pre-K and strong early learning environments and transitions to kindergarten. Ensuring access to high-quality preschool and strong early learning environments provides the foundation for transitioning to kindergarten and being equipped to meet expectations in critical foundational skills. The Office of Early Learning has been working with local community teams to collaborate and align local planning for expanding access for early childhood services. This important work that Dan Tetro presented to the board in May will continue on schedule. At this time, I can take any questions that you may have about this crosswalk. Our division is taking all actions to ensure that our youngest scholars have access to the most effective, evidence-based, systematic, and explicit instructional practices to build critical foundational reading skills in order to become independent, proficient readers and our future leaders.
Thank you, Dr. Galloway. First, thank you for the work you and your team to put this together and to give us a comprehensive sense of what you're doing. To your efficiency in going through it, that was remarkable. But also the hard work that you're providing on a range of literacy initiatives. So let me get some questions here. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you very much, and greetings from Dr. Laura Stahl at UNC Pembroke, one of our reading professors.
Yes, tell her I said hello.
Pleased the collaboration with you. I certainly will do that. This is just really, I don't have the word, the best word that's coming forward is ambitious, and in the end will be productive and meaningful, and hopefully will result in students in North Carolina who are good readers. But I can't help but wonder how do you have some metric plan in place to be able to say we're working hard on the allocation of instructional resources, because that's I think that's one of the bullet points or elements in your plan. I was just trying to absorb it all. Expanding Wolfpack across North Carolina, because that seems to be such a rich approach to reading instruction. How would you blend the expansion of Wolfpack across the other school systems and our EPPs, our schools and colleges of education, and at the same time take a look at allocation of resources in classrooms? Is that the way you plan to approach that, to integrate some of these pieces?
Right. So basically we have consultants in each region, and we would all pull together to do each of the different pieces of this. And that's really what we've done so far, is to break apart each of the different responsibilities outlined here. And each person would be responsible for each piece of this puzzle that we're trying to put together for the sake of the students. So the Wolfpack Works piece would be led by one of my consultants, and then the framework for the teachers would be led by another one of my consultants. So altogether, there is a strategic plan moving forward where it all does fit together. It looks like a lot of different pieces outlined here, but in reality, it does fit together.
And another follow-up.
The timeline is challenging.
The science of reading, the science of reading instruction or teaching reading, is that something that is built into Wolfpack Works?
They do. They follow the science of reading, and we are going to involve them in any training that we proceed with. So the science of reading is really facing how kids actually learn to read. And that knowledge can be used with any curriculum that teachers use in the classroom. So that's what we want to put in the hands of teachers, is how they can effectively use whatever curriculum they have in their classroom, instead of going to Pinterest or Google or whatever to pull together resources. Actually have a high quality curriculum that they use in their classroom, and then be able to incorporate the science of reading into that.
Theoretical approach.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Other questions? I want to run through just a little bit of a timeline for us. A lot of this work is department work, going out, supporting schools, working with partners. And I just want to make sure as a board we understand when some things may come to us. So here's my cheat sheet as I'm looking at yours and seeing a timeline we'd like to think about. On number one, I think you note that by December 2019, we'd bring a definition for discussion, action in January. On focus on reconstruction, teacher prep, I think we'd like to work a timeline where for any providers applying for renewal next summer, we would have a framework to operate with.
The standards.
Yeah. So whatever that gets us there by July of 2020, The same with reading camps. I think we'd want to have a policy proposal that would provide improvements by next summer's reading camps. Obviously, we're past this summer.
Right.
On the reading coach supports, the expand partnerships, those would be potential budget asks, so prospective inclusions in the department and state board's joint budget submission, which I think, Ms. Johnson, is probably November timeline. That by November, we'd see the first cut at some potential items. In the high-quality curriculum, I think we'd want something that would allow us to start looking at that work for next year, so maybe in June, where we would have some high-quality items. And then one area that might be helpful to think about, and Ms. White, I'm borrowing from your playbook here, what supports do we make sure are available to parents and guardians at home? And if we had some resources we were be able to provide through our website or others by next summer. Last three, you mentioned the pilot program for number 7, whatever the right time, whether that's October, November, to update us on what that's looking like and to think then about what full implementation, I think you said by 2022, could look like. Number 8, we've done the work on the device funding and some flexibility, but a potential, I think, budget inclusion for any special provisions that might give districts flexibility on teacher allotments, teacher assistant allotments, textbook allotments, if they had uses to focus on K-3 reading, that we could approve. I think a proposal that looked at a special provision for the budget. And then finally, number 9, I think is another, if there are any potential inclusions in our budget asks related to pre-K transition, again in November. So I'm going to memorialize this for us with you. I think those dates are responsive to this framework and the timeline we're trying to operate on. We'll share that, but that gives us a little bit of a sense of in October, November, and next spring, the kind of things that will come to us, understanding that there are lots of things that you all are doing every day that we don't need to look at or approve, that that's just the work that you all are doing.
Right. And if you remember back in May, when I presented a lot of this work, we had the timeline laid out. So we would just need to make some minor adjustments to that based on some of these things bumping out a little bit and some coming a little bit closer.
Ms. Morris is a second grade teacher. Before we leave this item, we'll make sure you have a chance to weigh in.
I'm really excited about the work being done. I would like to just emphasize one part when we're talking about the reading, the coaching, and thinking about reading supports from a reading interventionist perspective. A lot of times that's with our Title I money that we staff those positions. However, we have a high percentage of our students in non-Title I schools who are not reading proficiently, and a lot of times that is following the socioeconomic gap that we see, and they're not being served in any capacity. And so when we lost the reading interventionist positions in regions like my own because of schools that are not Title I, those students aren't being served. So I'd like to find something to reach those students as we move forward.
Right. I would too. I am completely in line with you there. And
You've got an extension of your team right here now.
Yes. How can we get you aboard?
Right. All right.
Mr. Bucks.
Let's go.
Just real quick.
Yeah, please.
Again, said this many, many times. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you to the K-3 literacy team. While everything has been going on with the reading diagnostic and you begin the trainings out and we've been dealing with the back and forth on that, y'all have been running down these changes as well. And it's very exciting to see that we're bringing changes to these programs because if we're not moving the needle for students, then we need to do something different, and that's what we're doing. Do want to give a special shout out. Someone I'm actually talking to back and forth right now with email, Principal Smith down in Brunswick County. If you remember, she's from Union Elementary. They knocked it out of the park, and they're an inspiration for why we're doing this work, because if they've proven a model that can work for students, we need to be the people that help get that model out to other schools. So also wanted to give them a shout out because they're about to get hit again by a hurricane, and we're all thinking about them. But again, Tara, thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Superintendent. Thank you,
Thank you
Dr.
for all the
Galloway.
support.
Chairman, that concludes our agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton. Before we break for lunch, we'll move to our special committee on digital learning and computer science, and I recognize the committee's chair, Lieutenant Governor Forrest.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you all know, we continue to plug along on digital learning, and many years now after the digital learning plan was rolled out in North Carolina, planning still keeps going on, and I don't think planning's ever going to stop. We're going to hear a little bit about that today. Dr. Vanessa Wren, Digital Teaching and Learning Director at DPI, as well as Ms. Emma Bratton, Digital Learning Initiative Specialist, are going to discuss the success of the Digital Learning Initiative Planning Grants. And they have two schools that they're highlighting today as well. So you get to see the real work that's being done on the ground. And so I will turn the floor over to whoever wants to get up first and take the stage here.
Good morning and thank you. It's my honor and privilege to introduce to you Dr. Vanessa Wren. This is her first state board meeting presenting. We are so excited that we captured her from Granville County and that she's aboard as the director of this division, and she will introduce her team.
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Emery, for that introduction. I am so excited to provide this update for you today on our digital learning initiative. We're going to focus this quarter on the DLI grants and get a very special treat of hearing from Edenton Chowan and Perquimans County today. I'm very passionate about digital learning, as you will learn as you get to know me. I have seen firsthand the access and engagement it brings to educators and students. Part of the work of this grant has been able to provide students, no matter where they are geographically or economically, access to quality teaching and learning. These competitive grants have supported our public school units as they have expanded and deepened their digital age culture. One of the things we've also seen as we looked at the work of the charters and districts as they took their grants and had freedom to implement that the way they needed to, was that they were able to operationalize personalized learning and micro-credentialing. Another outcome that we have seen from these grants are models of innovation across the state. And we're going to get to see and look at some of those today. And one of the outcomes that I've seen from that, as I've read through what the districts are doing, is we've increased the access that students have to highly qualified educators and also increased access of digital professional learning for teachers. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Ms. Emma Bratton. She's our Digital Learning Initiative Specialist, and she's going to talk more about the impact across the state and what the work in the field has been.
Thank you, Dr. Wren. Good morning. I am pleased to bring to you an update on the work of our digital learning grants this month. The North Carolina Digital Learning Plan recommended the provision of these grants to support the development and dissemination of best practices for digital age teaching and learning. So our goal here has been to develop these practices and have them spread across the state. And the districts and schools that were awarded these grants, they really work to prioritize these different things that you see on the screen. Our digital learning competencies for teachers and for administrators, innovative partnerships with institutes of higher ed, micro-credentialing, and also personalized learning. Last year, we had 32 grants that were awarded across the state. There were 9 planning grants. These were one-year grants for the 2018-19 school year. 2-year grants, there were 19 of those implementation grants, and then 4 3-year grants that serve as innovation academies for us across the state. Really, the intent then of our planning grants was to support those who are at the beginning stages of planning for digital age teaching and learning initiatives. Considering implementation science is a best practice for rolling out these initiatives, we would say that these districts and charter schools are really at the exploration and installation stages. To further support their needs, we partnered with the North Carolina State University's Friday Institute to provide coaching and technical support for these grantees as well. The intent then of the implementation grant was to support those who have developed and are piloting a high-quality plan for digital age teaching and learning, and to help them really grow and embed their programs in their work. These districts tend to be at the installation and initial implementation stages. And again, here we partnered with the Friday Institute for these districts to receive technical support for their programs. and then our innovation academies, were to support those who are ready across the state to serve as state leaders, to broaden their impact across their region and the state. These are the districts who have found success in their programs and are at the full implementation stage. And last month you heard from one of these school districts, Moore County Schools. Ms. Morris brought a team to discuss their work with computer science. They have an awesome program there, building K-5 engineers that they have focused on developing, where they invite educators to visit their schools, learn from what's happening in their classrooms, and then apply this work to their own settings. That's exciting work, and I know that every one of these schools, districts would love to have you visit them. But today, I'm pleased to have 2 school districts from the Northeast region to share with you their work to further digital age teaching and learning, and that's Edenton-Chowan Schools and Perquimans County Schools. They were awarded implementation grants based on their unique proposal to partner and combine efforts for maximum impact on student and teacher achievement. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Superintendent Jackson and Superintendent Turner and their Chief Technology Officers, Mr. Kerry Mebane and Ms. Martha Nixon.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, Mr. Vice Chair, Mr. Lieutenant Governor, Mr. Superintendent, members of the board, and board advisors. It is an incredible honor to stand in front of you to represent the work of our teachers, the dedication of our students to their studies, and to have the opportunity to prove once again there is life east of I-95. We certainly would invite each of you to come visit us in Edenton-Chowan Schools in northeastern North Carolina. We certainly appreciate all that you're doing. Having served this state board as the Principal of the Year advisor a number of years ago, I understand very clearly how much work goes into being a State Board of Education member. I remember the mountains of information I received before each monthly meeting and appreciated the work and diligence that State Board members put into understanding the information presented, because the decisions you make such a difference in each district. As a superintendent now going into my 6th year in Edenton-Chowan Schools, I want you to know how much I appreciate that you take the time through your questions, through your research, to understand the implication of your decisions on the varied districts across the state. The 115 school districts in our state are very different, from the very, very large to the very, very small. Chowan County, Perquimans County, our school systems represent 2 of the 20 smallest school systems in the state of North Carolina. To help you with context and setting, I'd like to kind of ask you to visualize a map of North Carolina. On the map that you're visualizing of North Carolina, if you move to the upper right-hand corner, just inside the Outer Banks, there's 3 little fingers that hang down. The first little finger is Chowan County. Our county seat is the town of Edenton, which was the colonial capital of what became the great state of North Carolina. The second and third fingers are Perquimans County Schools. And so we're located right on the coast on the Inner Banks region of North Carolina. It is a very rural area. It's an area that deals with a lot of poverty, but it's an area that is quite beautiful. And a beautiful state, it's an area, I think, that stands out for the beauty and the work. It's also an area that's dealing with a lot of population decrease as we have out-migration of people leaving that area of the state. It's an area that deals with a lot of poverty. In our school district, we are very grateful for the opportunities provided by the State Board of Education and DPI for access to resources through grants. A full 2 school years ago, we were the recipients of a planning grant under the Digital Learning Initiative. We are a K-12 one-to-one digital learning device district. We were able to accomplish that through using a Golden Leaf grant and then careful stewardship of local resources. We have iPads in grades K through 2 and Chromebooks in grades 3 through 12. However, as we began that work, we realized that we needed to continue to dive deeply in our professional development with our staff members, because there are times when the most appropriate response to technology in the classroom is to shut the device and place it to the side. It's a tool that also gives us great opportunity for differentiation for each of our students, allowing our students to reach their individual student success, but we have to be able to make the determination in the lesson, in the instructional activity, when best to use it, when not to use it. And so approaching the previous school year, the year we've just ended, we sat down with our friends and partners in Perquimans County Schools, and we recognized one of our greatest needs is the poverty that we deal with in northeastern North Carolina. One of our greatest strengths is the collaboration. In some ways, we say we're just all poor together. And we come together, we work hard together, and so we each individually, our school systems, applied for the planning grant, hoping that each school system would receive that. We did receive it, and from the outset, from the initial planning for the grant application, our two school districts have worked together to leverage the economy of scale so that together we could bring in speakers. Together we could provide resources for our teachers. We've had great success. And so I'll get out of the way and let the really smart people talk. I'd like to introduce you to my colleague and friend, Ms. Tanya Turner, the superintendent of Perquimans County Schools.
Thank you, Dr. Jackson, and thank you for allowing us to be here today. We all know that before you determine what you're going to do, you have to know why you're doing it. That's going to drive everything you do from the what to the how, and it should impact the outcome of whatever your vision is from the beginning. As our two districts began this journey, our why was to help our teachers build this regional network of professional support and help. And they wanted to do that through professional learning, quality professional learning together. So 4 focus areas of need emerged from this work, and you see those areas on the slide. Many times technology, if we're not careful, can take our focus away from what the real why is. And in our opinion, and we know from the work that we've done, technology should never drive the teaching and learning process. Teaching and learning should drive the technology. And that was a very important focus for us in our district collaboration. We wanted our focus to be on the instructional design and delivery of high quality lessons, with technology coming in to support that high quality lesson and that high quality instruction, and be able to enhance the learning and the teaching that was going on around it. So we wanted our digital coaches trained with that focus in mind, so that this initiative could continue and be sustained over time, and that we build that culture of knowing that technology shouldn't be the driving point. Teaching and learning should always be the driving point, with technology as a support. So though our why began with this collaboration just between our two districts, it doesn't stop there. Our ultimate vision is to build that into a regional network, a network that's going to impact not only Eaton-Chowan and Perquimans County, but all of the Northeast region, as Dr. Jackson mentioned in his opening slide. So we're very excited about this vision, and we see it becoming a reality. We see it from the work that we've done last year, and we see it with the vision and the continuing work that is developing this year. And we're going to have our chief technology officers from both counties share that work with you, so you can see what we've done and where we're going.
Good morning.
Morning.
Thank you for the opportunity for us to share with you today. As we began our work on the implementation grant, we wanted to ensure that we were going to have outcomes that would meet our district's needs. We also wanted to be fully aligned to our strategic plans, aligned to the digital learning initiative in our state, and make sure everything was grounded in the standards. We wanted, most of all, to grow teacher leaders, and that has been our driving force. We wanted to push teachers to rethink their instructional design practices and embrace personalized learning with a focus on the digital learning competencies. We also knew we wanted to network and be able to collaborate with colleagues teaching in the same content areas and grade levels, which can be challenges in small schools, because we have 4 schools in each of our districts that are designed with specific grade levels: pre-K2, 3-5, 6-12, and 9-12. 6-8 and 9-12. So our high school teachers could collaborate with Perquimans County high school teachers. We know these elements are critical to helping our students be more successful. The implementation grant provided the opportunity for this work to happen. With these goals in mind, we molded our vision we molded our vision to become our Digital Innovator Leaders Initiative, and the model includes up to 40 teachers a year who are invited in through an interest-based application and principal recommendation. We provide over 30 hours of professional learning, one-on-one collaboration, and coaching support from our district-level digital learning coaches, and digital learning devices, content, and resources for classroom implementation.
Teachers interested in becoming a digital innovator complete the application and are chosen using a rubric based on leadership, years of experience, and core content and level of technical skills. Digital innovator leaders accept the challenge to be the digital learning experts in their individual schools. In addition to redesigning their own approach to engaging students, they open their classrooms to other teachers to observe best practices. They provide professional development to all teachers in their schools, and they collaborate with and coach all teachers as they develop and implement innovative practices. As we began planning the work, we also knew it was important to involve and consider options for media coordinators and administrators who play major roles in our schools' instructional programs. Media coordinators from both districts engaged in professional learning opportunities designed to support them in developing a vision for collaborating with teachers and a vision for transforming media centers to learning common spaces to support personalized learning. This journey began with learning walks, including a visit to the Hunt Library at North Carolina State University and other LEA model programs. Collaboration for our media coordinators serving the same grade spans reached a new level through this work. As one of them shares, meeting with the other media coordinators has given me a new vision for my media center. They have shown me how to create new physical spaces, incorporate maker spaces, and new technology. I feel I have found a valuable resource that has impacted the way I help my teachers and students.
In this work, we also wanted to include the third group of professional staff that's very important to our success, and that's the administrators in our schools. So we wanted to ensure that they had the support they needed to lead digital learning initiatives in their schools by maximizing the power of collaboration, not just among their teachers, but also utilizing the expertise of their media coordinators and our district-level digital learning coaches. So our administrators also engaged in the professional learning sessions with the digital innovator leader teachers from their schools and their media coordinators as well. The school leaders also sought new skills and knowledge through state-level professional learning opportunities and national conferences that they attended. I'd like to share a quote from one of our principals about the impact of this work in his school. It's illustrated carefully in his words, and this is his reflection. The learning opportunity allowed me to participate in hands-on activities with my staff and to experience what it could feel and look like for students in our school. These sessions allowed us to rethink how we approach instruction and to create intentional opportunities for students to engage in hands-on activities and explore the content for themselves. As I complete daily walkthroughs in classrooms, I see teachers providing opportunities for students to engage on a deeper level with their peers. Relevant professional development, we know, is very important when asking teachers to consider new approaches to instructional design. Therefore, in addition to our digital innovator leaders, our media coordinators, and school leaders, we wanted to include anywhere, anytime, and personalized professional learning opportunities for all teachers in our districts. Both of our LEAs use Canvas as our learning management system, and we're also fortunate in the Northeast to have Credly provided for us by the Northeast RESA. So it was a natural fit for us to use these existing resources to develop our micro-credentialing and badging solution.
Our digital coaches created and managed an online professional learning environment through Canvas to provide courses for our teachers. Our coaches built professional learning courses according to their needs. For example, our K-2 teachers wanted to use Seesaw as a portfolio tool. Our guidance counselors needed digital citizenship lessons to plan with small groups. And even our athletic director, who also needed DLC credits, worked with a digital coach to learn how to add the athletic schedule to Google Calendar and to update the athletic webpage. All of these courses were designed and managed through Canvas to meet the needs of our staff members. DLC professional learning goes beyond the sit and get training. We require teachers to submit an artifact to show how they implement what they have learned in the classroom. It becomes even more important for us to provide those relevant courses to our teachers when they know what they are learning is something they will actually use in their classroom. Our digital coaches approve the DLCs before submitting the credits to the HR department.
We're very proud of all of our teachers who are digital innovator leaders in our district. Now, I'd love to have them here with us today because they can tell this story much better than I. But I would like to share with you about one of our middle school teachers, Miss Laura Olam. She is one of our digital innovator leaders, and she's very excited about embracing the power of digital learning with her students. She used her expertise as a digital innovator leader to support leadership growth in her students. She believes each of her students' potential to master content and share their knowledge with other students. Through collaboration with the media coordinator in her school and with our district level digital learning coach, Ms. Olam facilitated her students' learning of coding skills and engaged them in various makerspace learning experiences which were all grounded in standards. In turn, her students then facilitated the learning of these same skills and experiences for all students in her school who are in the regular instructional program. Ms. Olam often works with students who have unique challenges. Ms. Olam continues to grow as a digital innovator leader. This summer, she had an opportunity to attend a week-long professional learning in Golden, Colorado. And in that training, she learned how to implement the art of coding using computer game fundamentals and basic algebra. Ms. Olam shared that she was quite eager to embrace the opportunity to learn and to collaborate with her other educators in her school and to return to her school to lead by sharing not only in her classroom, but with all teachers in her school.
Ms. Duncan, she has over 32 years of teaching experience. She's one of our teachers at Paquimon Central School. She's a first grade teacher, but has limited experience with technology. Before applying for our program, Ms. Duncan warned us that she still used a flip phone. As we started the professional learning session, Ms. Duncan leaned heavily on the digital coach. They planned and co-taught many lessons together. About mid-year, Mrs. Duncan started a coding lesson with her little first graders to extend a math lesson. One student who struggled the day before learning the math concept in a traditional lesson became the leader during the coding session. Mrs. Duncan, with the help of the digital coach, co-taught many lessons throughout the year. They ended the year with a sea turtle unit. Students researched sea turtles using books as well as online resources and worked in pairs to create a Help Save the Sea Turtles brochure. In this video, the students code Spiros demonstrating how sea turtles dodge trash in our oceans. In June, Mrs. Duncan organized to bring the whole first grade team together, focusing on content and instruction with our digital coach to plan and create interactive digital lessons of math units to prepare for this year. Our amazing flip phone teacher truly became a digital leader at our school. Do you ever wonder how teachers do what they do for all of our students? They are expected to know curriculum, differentiate all the lessons, manage a classroom, teach and care for students every day, and to top it off, know all the technology tools to use effectively in the classroom. This past year, we believe our biggest impact was not only bringing high-quality professional learning sessions from our digital coaches, but requiring our teachers to work, plan, and design lessons with our coaches in one-on-one sessions. Our coaches helped our teachers integrate technology, research, and problem-solving skills in their daily lessons. First grade teachers here figure out how to build pumpkin chunking catapults, and then measure how far their pumpkin was thrown and maybe even rebuild. Students in biology write their own breakout EDU for other classes to see who can break the code first. 7th grade students invented and coded chariots to participate in a chariot race after studying the Industrial Revolution. These lessons engage students while promoting creativity, critical thinking, and collaboration.
So as part of our vision and a culminating piece for our yearly work as we go through our grant implementation and beyond, is to collaborate and share what we're doing in our districts with all school districts in our region. It's very important for us to provide professional growth and support every single teacher. So attendance at state and national conferences isn't always possible due to budget constraints, and you already heard from Dr. Jackson where we're located in the far north corner of the state. But it is possible for us to provide a conference setting locally with our digital innovator leaders and our media coordinators providing the content. Our professional conference day this year was August 15th, which was actually prior to the time that our 10-month employees had to return to work. We did, however, have a registration of almost 150 participants at our conference day. Participants selected from 22 options to personalize their professional growth at the conference. The content was aligned with all the digital learning competencies and standards. Evaluation data from that day let us know that the digital innovator leaders and media coordinators who had worked so hard to prepare for it were very knowledgeable about topics, and that all sessions were informative and applicable to the content areas.
As we begin year 2 of the grant with continued support and leadership from Emma Broughton, the Division of Digital Teaching and Learning, Friday Institute, our superintendents, and our local boards, we want to continue to focus on building classroom curriculum and providing more support to our teachers. Our technology conference will expand beyond our 2 districts and be open to the Northeast region. We are excited to extend this invitation to our regional neighbors to participate in the upcoming technology conference and to share high-quality professional learning in order to build partnerships throughout the region. When the why is clear, the how is easy.
I want to thank both of our school districts for coming this morning to share with us the work of what is going on in their programs. It's exciting to know that this, the Digital Learning Initiative is having an impact, and to hear from them directly is really, really important for us and exciting too. But what you've heard today from them is similar to what we're also hearing from other grant recipients too. They have rich opportunities for professional learning for teachers, and much of this has been developed and facilitated at the district level, which is empowering for everyone involved. They have a growing network they can rely upon, and they have opportunities for leadership and growth within their own district. So on this slide, you see teachers from Craven County providing some tech tastings for their colleagues as they learn more about how technology can be used in the classroom. And on the left, this is a screenshot from Gaston County's PD in Your PJs, where teachers have flexible access to professional learning anytime and anywhere. Because of this type of approach, then districts are reporting a higher level of engagement and leadership. Teachers and students and the community have been impacted. So here on the left, you can see that this mother and daughter from Rutherford County Schools are at the Kinderpalooza to better understand the types of learning environments that students will have while they're in the classroom. And then on the right, educators from Granville County are being celebrated for their success for completing the STARS program. We also see further evidence of impact of the work of the grants in classroom implementation. So districts have reported over and over again how teachers are applying the practices they learn into their classrooms and into their instructional design. So as you heard from our districts this morning, we have 2 more examples here, one from Winston-Salem Forsyth Schools, where students are working with their school librarians to create a video, and also there in Duplin County as they work with a variety of different digital content resources to complete their research. And ultimately, our primary goal, as you've seen throughout today's presentation, is the impact that it can have on student learning. Here in Chatham County and in Currituck, there are students engaged in standard-aligned learning activities. So it's exciting to see the students with their hands on the technology, their high levels of engagement, and the potential for student ownership of their learning. So as we move forward into the 2019-20 school year, we're committed to the support of the implementation grants and the innovation academies. And once the state budget is approved, we hope to identify what funds may be available to move forward with additional grant opportunities for this year and beyond. We're also focused on how we can leverage the resources and materials that these districts are producing to help educators across the state. We plan to leverage the Go Open initiative as a platform for these districts to publish and to share with others. We're hopeful, and we have growing evidence that this work for digital age teaching and learning will continue to strengthen, to spread, and to scale across the state, and will have incredible impact for our students and their achievement. Thank you for the opportunity this morning to share with you about the work of our DLI grants.
Thank you, Ms. Broughton. Do we have any questions or comments from the board for Ms. Broughton? Great. Thank you very much, and thank you to our friends from Perquimans and from Chowan Edenton as well. Thank you very much for your presentations.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. What a great way to end the morning. That's a terrific presentation, and thank you for what you're doing for our students. We'll now break for lunch and reconvene at 1:15.
I'm gonna write it out.
Was lunch worked out?
RSVP something. My husband's last day.
Oh, you just go.
Oh, they have lunch for us.
I don't even remember lunch more or less.
We didn't have ours.
We didn't
and they were
really
like,
Pretty scary if you don't
Roll through, and then, that's right.
They have lunch out there. Barely.
Really? Him going in.
I'll be at a.
A long agenda for this afternoon.
Mercy, the person who said, "Are you guys?"
I would love to see.
That's right. I'm gonna.
And you let me know.
Party parts. That's implementation. Sure that got massive. But first round of grants.
We know he trained for the Krispy Kreme.
Opportunity.
He did. He ran. He did not eat the donuts.
One of the best parts about that race is
I like that. And our district pretty good going on. Have site visits. Have a day where any of your
We may have been. Yes.
This
oh, cool. So he's also American.
And she's also.
Okay. We love that. Yeah, awesome. Oh, your first little fish? Yeah?
Oh, not well.
Best entrance.
Okay, cool. All right.
That was awesome. Then he walked in and.
I did. Okay, who's your sister? Oh, where's Facebook? Oh, yeah, that's great. Yeah, you as well. That's awesome. All right, well.
yeah, no, these are
Come on in here.
Raise the screen.
Hey, Jamie, can you get the screen to go up?
Sorry. to get with y'all and teach y'all how to do the spreadsheet. Let's get out.
Please on in there.
Okay, will you take one off each one of these? Thank you.
Everybody kind of squeeze in a little bit, just make the picture look better. All right, I think we got 5 cameras.